Hello.
Hello. Yeah, having my lunch right now, so
Fair enough. I had it in
okay.
very quickly as well because I have another call in an hour, and that means can't eat when I should.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I have a meeting right after too.
Okay, who else is joining? Not clear actually, because Steven said he wouldn't, and he's pretty much the only person online on Slack. Oh, Jonathan, maybe.
I was going to say while we're waiting, maybe you could talk a little bit about the conference. But if Jonathan is going to join us, maybe you want to do it when he's on.
Yeah, I'm frankly, I said I'd say it off the record, and off the record does mean not while I'm not while I'm on a recorded conference.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But what I said in the Slack, it was a very, very diverse crowd with a very broad diversity of interests. I thought it would be more focused on I mean, it bills itself as collective intelligence, and yeah, it is in the sense that it's a bunch of people talking about what they're doing, but not many efforts at synthesis were not officially part of the agenda. This is my initiative, and some of them were good. Some of them I don't believe in, to be charitable. But that's okay. I mean, diversity is good, but I thought it would be more focused than that, and it wasn't. So it was frankly a loss of time for many of us. On the other hand, it was useful to me. What?
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, exposure to all these different projects and to the network.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about understanding what people are talking about and what are they looking for in a tool, and that was very useful. But yeah, it was not smack in my and I did make a few contacts which I think are interesting and useful, so I'm happy. I got a few people interested in the hyper knowledge idea, and I'm happy about that. So it was not I'm not saying it was a total waste, because it wasn't, but it's certainly it wasn't focused time for me. Let's put it this way. That's fine.
That's reasonable. When I got from the white paper, I just skimmed the white paper, and it looked a lot about essentially how do you. It didn't seem like it was focused on tools for collective intelligence. It was more like, how do we create an environment in which people are contributing toward the greater good as a whole, having a net positive feedback, right? Loop.
Yeah. And see, I went because of Vincent, and Vincent is doing good, useful work with his Trove. And why I'm not doing that work is because I don't think the world needs another community hub. But on the other hand, the reality is the community, we don't. Okay, the community hubs we have don't totally fill the service we want. They're too unfocused, and maybe this one is too unfocused, but this one does think about input, output, and connecting and exchanging data, unlike most of them who want to create their own walled garden. So kudos to Vincent that way. He is thinking about APIs and how can my community hub interact with other community hubs. So he's bought the Federation Kool-Aid, and for that I'm happy. And it's a real need. And the reality is the existing community hubs are not used because they're not working that well. He's trying to do something that works better, and he has interesting ideas in that direction, and that's useful. It's not collective intelligence in the way I understand it, in the sense of public thinking space. It's a public meeting and collective. How can I help this? How can I find communities I can help? How can I find people who can help me with my project? How even can we find complementary projects? So it's very much about helping people help one another. And that's absolutely great. He has punted the problem of idea resolution and idea alignment by just putting a shitload of tags in a lot of the things. And it's so entirely possible, like in Delicious, that somebody will use a tag meaning something different than what I do. And that means we think we're aligned because we have the same tags, but we're not because we don't give them the same meaning. That is not a solved problem. And he's decided it doesn't matter, just like Delicious decided it didn't matter and it was still good enough in aggregate. And that may be true of Trove as well. I'm trying to, that's one problem I'm trying to solve, but doesn't matter. I think it does. So many people don't in practice. But also,
it's a macro view of, it doesn't matter in general. It could matter very much in a very specific case. But this is getting complete coverage of everything. It seems to be working, right?
Yeah. And folksonomy works actually quite well, right? So his is a kind of in between folksonomy and taxonomy because there are, I think you can just enter your word. I haven't tried that. I should check that, but I think he has very much a core of these are the terms I entered as core. Let's start with those. And that's a problem I've always found fascinating. Like, can we think of something in between taxonomy and folksonomy? And I think it's just us two. So let's have this conversation.
Between taxonomy and what?
Folksonomy. The folksonomy was very much introduced as a concept for Delicious. I think it's Clay Shirky who introduced it, and saying basically let people use arbitrary tags and we'll use statistics on the tags to see what are the tags that people align on. And that gives you a way to classify things which does not require people agreeing on an ex cathedra taxonomy. So it's a way to avoid the difficulty of aligning on a taxonomy by just take whatever tags folks use, and if they're popular, they're good tags. And I've always been, okay, can we do a kind of in between where we start with a taxonomy when it's well established, and if something doesn't fit, let people propose new tags, and when the tag gets popular, you can look at incorporating the most popular tags in the taxonomy so they become official. And
something like dictionaries, right? Every year they add X number of words to their official dictionary. Yeah,
exactly. So have a kind of dynamic taxonomy that is fed by a folksonomy. So that's one simple solution. And the non-simple solution, of course, is the contested boundary stuff I'm trying to do with hyperknowledge, and that I wanted to talk about. So in a way, it's a good segue.
All right, let's go for it. Nobody's showing up, so
yeah,
and it's your day, so let's do it.
Yeah, unless if you have things to propose, I don't want to be.
Nope.
Okay. Nope. So I'm okay. I like what Steve is introducing, saying there's a structural first layer and there's the second layer where we speak about voting, right? Now, when we're talking about disputed concepts, right? We have, on the one hand, people use, we speak about the immutable content addressable identifiers, which is the concept snapshot, or even a snapshot of a description of a concept. That's one thing, it's immutable and it doesn't show evolution. We can give arbitrarily, and that's what most people do, an identifier, whether it's a URL like in semantic web or a UID or whatever, to a concept, or we can use the name of the concept, hey, and or a phrase to say this is what the concept is about, and then all the successive definitions are tied to that one identifier. And I've been saying all along, no, it's not that good because we discover splits as we discuss, and we discover mergers as we discuss. So identities are, there's no one-to-one correspondence between any one identifier, formal or informal, and the concept, because the concept is too protean. And there's not even alignment on the concept. Some people will say, you know, this is part of the concept, and some will not. That there's concept boundaries are disputed. Okay, fine. That's what I'm saying. And I'm saying, let's have only the snapshots and the links between the snapshots. That's fine. But now, okay, we do that. And then we have, here's an identifier of a snapshot. And then I want to ask the system, whether it's centralized or federated, shouldn't matter here. I want to ask the system, okay, what is known about this snapshot subsequent evolution or even past evolution, right? What is the neighborhood of that concept in terms of A, proposed successive versions, proposed splits, proposed merges? And we can get a network without any voting, a layer 1 network, which can be extremely divergent. And I said something about, well, maybe at the second layer, we can do, we can favor inclusive synthesis. That is, this is not the same, and I want to make a difference between the synthesis and the merge. Merge is we have to establish concept, we're saying they're actually the same thing. Synthesis.
What is the definition of synthesis?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Yeah.
We have, I'm using here, maybe I should call it definition synthesis and be more precise, but I'm speaking about the case where we have 2 or 3 different divergent definitions of a concept, which is understood to be the same. And we're trying to create a definition that is a bit more neutral point of view that ideally different parties could agree on. Yeah, this is what we're talking about, even if we disagree about what's true about it. But we agree on what we're talking about. And that way it's a synthesis in the sense that it covers the definition as understood by factions, if there be factions. Or simply, if many people have done edits, it could be as simple as saying, well, this edit is relevant. This could be a curation operation where we accept or reject certain edits, and that's also a synthesis. Certain things are rejected. But that's okay because they've been taken into account. Even rejection is taking into account. Something Jonathan said last week that I thought was extremely important when he was speaking about Bayesian, the collective Bayesian network, is that people often attribute probabilities to claims in ignorance and saying, I think that there's, I'll give a simple example. He didn't give it. If I said the Earth is flat before the calculations were made about the Earth's rotundity in early Greece,
it's an unproven claim. If there's, you don't have the evidence. You're missing the evidence.
So I'm missing evidence, and it's a plausible claim.
I give it an 80% chance this is what we're going to find when we collect the evidence.
Yeah, and it's not the same in one sense. It is not the same statement saying the Earth is flat, not knowing about the evidence why it's round, and saying it's flat despite the evidence that it's round. At another level is the same statement. And I know that in canonical debate terms, we do want to be able to say it's the same statement, but it's true that its value in calculating aggregate probabilities should be different. It's the whole question of what's the good of an uninformed poll or an uninformed
Right. This is
vote?
something that is unresolved with me. I realized the need for this some ways back, and like never put it into the white paper, and I wasn't sure because I thought it'd add more complexity than people would want to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, the truth is it depends on the person, right? But you know, it still comes down, even if you're just talking a simple flat base layer argument map, is where do you place the argument of, well, we just don't have enough information yet, because that is an argument against pro and an argument against con. It's an argument that averages it to the middle of uncertainty, right? And that's a debate. It's a whole debate that is supposed to be averaging to the middle, essentially.
Interesting. Yeah. That's
another way to think about it.
Another version of that problem. Absolutely.
Yeah, and another analogy I think about it is, well, it is another dimension, essentially. I think that, you know, a mathematical dimension to the debate to be discussed, and it's kind of like giving a color. If instead of pro con, if you are talking colors, right, you have the color, but then you have the transparency or the white balance sort of things that.
Yep. I always said I wanted the pros and cons to be on two axes, so that if you don't have strong pro, strong con, you're in this kind of neutral gray area. And strong pro and strong con means you're in this highly contentious area.
Yeah. My you know, my go-to example for that is abortion, right? You have really strong, and this is the one I will bring up whenever we talk about what is the meaning of, you know, rating relevance, because I talk about, you know, what the impact, if you're scoring the impact and relevance of something, you can have an argument that wins, it trumps all other arguments. If that argument is true, if its foundation is true, then it wins the debate, right? But I think in the abortion case, it's essentially got two sides that have arguments that strong. And so what does it mean when you have 100% impact on both, and yet they're both true? Yeah, it's a very different thing from just being unsure or wishy-washy about it.
No, it is a totally different phenomenon, yes. So anyway, in a way, I shouldn't have brought this in because it is a distinct thing. And I want to say, I mostly wanted to say it's a distinct thing. Saying on the one hand, it's not the same argument. On the same hand, it is the same argument. Like saying the earth is flat in ignorance of evidence and saying it despite the counter evidence. And in a deep way, they're different. And that way, people I'm working with, some people I'm talking to are looking at tracking every access, like tracking, like keeping a history of the reads, which I think is prohibitively expensive. But on the other hand, God, I see the point.
You're getting to the paper on Hacker News ranking, where, you know, essentially the number of views goes into the scoring because it's an important metric.
Yeah, which is a bit different, but this is more about. But yeah, I guess it is a form of scoring. Like if this thing is viewed, it's interesting to know that it's viewed, and you need to count that. No, well, it's different to count the reads and to count the reads per person, right? Which is much more costly in space time in space. And I think what was proposed, necessarily count the read per person, but know who has read, which is costly, but serves a real purpose, especially when we're speaking copyright disputes.
Yeah, it serves a purpose, and it's also a vector of attack because of that purpose, right?
It is. So I'm still thinking that through, but certainly, I would like to at some point say this argument. I should be able to say explicitly it is made taking into account this, that, and the other. It's not made in ignorance of this, it's made in knowledge of this. And I should be able to say that explicitly. You know, not despite all this, I still believe X. And I think that's important, being able to say, yeah, those are, there was somebody arguing for aliens yesterday. I'm skeptical. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just skeptical. I think the evidence is not extraordinary enough for the extraordinary claim.
By aliens, you mean actually visitation by extraterrestrial intelligent life? Yeah.
Yeah. And government cover-up and the whole conspiracy theory bit, which I absolutely don't buy. I'm more than skeptical of. Visitations, I could, who knows? I doubt it, but conspiracy theory of government cover-up, I don't buy. That's me, whatever. Could even be wrong, who knows? But I'm going to make a strong claim there. But that's okay. I mean, we are allowed to have differing strong claims about things. And I don't want to shut someone like that off. I think the argument needs to be heard. But I want to give it in terms of, yeah, I've heard all your evidence and I know why you believe it. And I still think it's wrong. I think the evidence is not strong enough. That's a statement. As opposed to, well, I haven't read the evidence. I think it's bonkers on its face. And the reality is I've read some of the evidence and not all of it because I've got better things to do with my time. And I should, but maybe I'm missing something important. It's possible. Who knows? But this is a good example, right? I think it's important to say, well, I reviewed this, and this does not convince me. I think that should be part of a statement. Is that part of a statement's identity? I doubt it. So let's go back to statement identity, because that's what we're about, canonical.
Yeah, but so wait a minute. Yeah, putting this into canonical debate terms, you slip into conversational mode, like you're specifically focusing on one person interacting with another person in terms of, that is not interest. I'm not interested in that for the canonical debate, but there's the analogy, or where that maps into the canonical debate, is in scoring, and it's like, should one score carry more weight than another because of the amount of effort or knowledge that went into placing that score, right?
Yep. Which I believe it should.
Yeah, my first, my prior is no, because I think it's too hard to honestly capture that value. And so I feel like there's more noise and signal there.
And there's certainly no question that true believers will put an enormous amount of effort.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The motivated reasoners will put in. Yeah.
So I'm not sure effort is the right measure, but I think there should be something. The ability to just dismiss something out of hand without being able to point at least, and this, by the way, I'm very, I think David Bovell and liquid democracy is a perfectly fine thing. I'm saying, on this issue, I have not had time, and I've chosen not to take the time to read the research, do my own research, as the people say, because I am relying on this person who I deem competent on that issue to have done that work. And I'm happy to declare that my opinion is based on this other person who has done the work, and I haven't. And I trust that person's work. And I don't trust that person's work. So that's, I believe in, if we're going to have a measure of information, we have to have delegation. Is it worth it?
Well, so yeah, I disagree with that for the canonical debate scoring specifically. I'm all for liquid democracy and quadratic voting, delegation of votes and all that. I think that's excellent. But that's in voting, which is actually making a decision, as opposed to what the canonical debate is avoiding doing, is that And in that case, like, I feel like the only the goal of voting isn't really to win the debate, and so it isn't to, I know people will take it that way, but it isn't to win that, so hand off your vote to somebody who's going to go and vote whatever you think they should vote for you. No, it's about having to do the work to look at the reasoning behind things and understand it and declare your belief.
I understand the fact that the goals are different and the procedures will be different. That's fine. I think that being able to vote on something without doing the work is sometimes legitimate, as in like with democracy. And I would say it's sometimes legitimate in the canonical debate. That does not mean that delegated voting has to be the solution that the canonical debate will use. But I do think the problem is relevant. I don't know yet about the solution. In the sense,
yeah, I agree with the problem. And I would say that, you know, for things like that, I would see that as a layer 3 type of thing, because I do see the canonical debate as being either a major input or the underlying database for decision support systems. But again, you know,
that's
governance,
another layer for you.
plug in your governance and that sort of thing, you know.
But let's get back to, I'm sidetracking myself all the time. Sorry. The real question is, and I think voting is relevant to that even, but let's even postpone that if we can. We have disputed concept. Different people have different definitions, and they're saying, no, this is the right definition, or oh, this is how those definitions are different. No, they're not different, they're the same. And this is where it gets really interesting. Are those really two names of the same thing, or are they actually distinct concept? Is that distinction spurious, or is that distinction meaningful? This is where the boundary of the concept itself is in debate. And my basic question that I haven't solved yet, and it's in a way my blocker, is how do I represent that in the API? Because I feel that if I say, give me all the versions, I'll have a very huge number of versions, and I'd like to be able to kind of order them and say, these are the ones that seem to have consensus. And that's, I realize this is a layer 2 thing. And maybe I should just say, okay, layer 1, I get everything, that's life. And if that means I get the whole system, so be it, because somebody has maliciously, and that's a possibility, somebody has maliciously associated everything to everything. Right? It's a scenario.
Or, you know, or in layer 2, they're using higher level operations that programmatically do that, right?
Yeah.
It might be intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, there is a danger that with malicious users, and it'll happen at some point, we'll have the equivalence neighborhood will be theoretically unbounded. And that's a problem. On the other hand, I think that we need to have ordered or quasi-ordered, like heapish, you know, it doesn't have to be a full order, but a kind of heapish structure that tells us, well, this is the one that has, not only is the most broad, like claims to cover the most cases, but is acknowledged by at least some people, layer 2, to actually cover some of those cases. And this is why I'm like, how much can we separate layer 1 and layer 2 if that layer 2 voting is essential to bounding the identity query? And that's my blocker right now.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, you know, if I want to avoid decisions in canonical debate because that somebody loses and then they go away unhappy or disengaged or whatever. My solution to one version of that problem has always been, as you hear me saying, you don't have to decide, have both, and then interact with both versions and see where that goes. I think an interesting solution to this problem, at least in some use cases, you know, and I'm thinking about in terms of definitions and everything, is simply, you know, take the definition. If you have two definitions you want to merge or whatever, I really am warming up more and more to the idea of definitional claims, even though I haven't quite, you know, gone through them yet. But rather than debating back and forth about whether they mean the same thing, no, create the definitional claims. And if they share the same set of definitional claims, they are the same. If you can think of one that differentiates them and people can debate, you're debating about, I guess, does this fit into that or not? Or you're debating about, based on this definition, is this claim true or not? Based on this one, is it true or not? And the places where you find divergence of opinion is, I guess, where you found a boundary. And the places where people are clear that this claim is true for that definition and not for that definition, you found a differentiator, right? I think that's a kind of scoring that isn't actually voting in the sense of want it to be this way or we want it to be that way. It's more like Stephen's, let's highlight where there are differences of opinion. And
I've been arguing for distinguos as a reified object forever. Like, if you claim that your definition is substantially different, explain why and give me the differentiating claim. Absolutely. And if you claim that these are not different,
yeah, but here's where I would say, you know, in a canonical claim view, by my definition of canonical claim, the distinguo would only go to the definition, because what
yes,
you would do is you would have a structure, right? You'd have the structure that's fixed, and you can agree they're the same structure. It's just that I'm talking about a different meaning of this word here. And then you bring it over to the definitions where you...
Yeah. This thing goes applied to definitions, yes. I agree totally. For me, definitions are center of my focus, because for me, claims are built out of definitions. For me, the claims are the molecules. I know for you, claims is the basic unit, and I'll append definitions.
No.
Yeah.
Well, no, I am saying, like, the definition would be a part of a primary key. It would be required. Yeah. So in that sense, it is essential.
Essential. Okay, good. Yeah, I don't think we differed that much on this. It's just a matter of attention. But I hear you. Maybe we're not that different there. That's not important. But what I'm saying is, I think so far I agree, and it's been my everything. I agree with everything you said. I'm not sure it fully solves the problem, because I'm saying someone can claim equivalence of a definition with a myriad other definitions as a way to muddy the waters maliciously. And if we don't have voting, if we don't have a mechanism to say that was malicious and spurious and blah, 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 and, you know, anybody like, if we don't have a curation layer where we can say this is actually an attempt to destroy the integrity of the database, forget that.
Right, curation is unavoidable, and I think that curation necessarily entails making decisions. I mean, the way to not make decisions is to make every single person have to make the decision for themselves, which I've argued is way too much overhead for the average user. And if you give them a default, you're de facto making a decision for them, right? The tyranny of the default, right? So that's...
Yeah, if we do it by vote, this is a default, right? Saying we'll filter everything that's below a certain vote. And this is why I am more towards crowdsourcing than cadre of select curators like Jamie is. But I do believe that getting to evaluate whether people are doing a good job, like I'd have badges almost, like this person shows that they understand how to make the difference between argument they disagree with and an argument that's badly constructed, for example. And they will label that appropriately. They won't misuse the badly constructed tag for arguments they disagree with. And that is a skill, and it's a skill that needs to be recognized. And how to do that in a crowdsourced setup is interesting, but I think essential. Because we do need to have ways to have those decisions, and ideally to have those decisions crowdsourced. What I was thinking in terms of vote is, if somebody, to make it a reputation as well, right? If somebody regularly makes a lot of decisions where people on both sides of the argument, and it's interesting then to know the sides, think, no, this muddies the waters, then they could be dinged. And you could say, no, you're until you show that you're willing to not muddy the waters, your arguments are going to be hidden by default, or below the fold. But that's a totally layer 2, or as you said, maybe even layer 3. It's totally a vote. But I do think it's important even for layer 1, because if it's even sourcing, if we keep track of everything, that means curation will downvote these spurious arguments, but it won't eliminate them. And I still believe strongly in that. And that means there's a bit of leakage of layer 2 into layer 1.
Well, Stephen, surprisingly, is in favor of some level 1 curation, right? And we haven't fully gotten him to, I guess he's still exploring it, to what level he thinks it should go. But he even goes so far as having a privileged class of users for that. But minimizing the damage by minimizing the number of curation things they have power over. Mostly it's submission, right? It's just gatekeepers. But yeah.
What Stephen is proposing when he speaks about mutable like he doesn't call them protoclaims, I call them protoclaims, but saying they're mutable until they're accepted. He's basically speaking about having a staging space.
Right. No, I know that's his intention. I know that's what he wants. And we're trying to use the same words for basically 2 different approaches, where I want anything to be contributed, and I want there to be a standard process across the board of improving it over time.
And I'm with you there. But the question is, it does mean that some of the curation operations, which are in the history, have to have an impact even on layer 1 requests, right? Where we say, okay, there's a lot of noise that I'm cutting off even from the layer 1 request, because it's being curated away with a kind of powerful enough downvote that you pretty much have to ask for it explicitly to get it. The default, and again, tyranny of the default, and I'm comfortable with tyranny of the default applying to curation, saying, unless you ask for the history of curation, what you'll get is the history of non-curation operations, and that means some stuff will be invisible, and that's fine. And it's only when you try to reintroduce it that you'll be told, you know what, this was curated away for a reason. Here's the reason. Do you have a new argument against that? Which could happen. Maybe the curation was invalid, and maybe you have a new argument why this was an invalid curation operation. That's legit. But it does mean, yeah, that way layer 1, layer 2, I'm sure exist at the data structures level, and makes sense to distinguish at the data structure level. But I don't think there's going to be much use for an API call that's totally layer 2 unaware. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so that being said, that means we agree on the basic notion of we'll have a way to avoid noise. And then if we accept curation operations, we still have contested, but at least hopefully in a manageable fashion, because it will correspond to real disagreement and not to hostile database attacks. So we have a basic point, and we'll look for the neighborhood, and we'll get all the evolution of this concept on this stream, which in your case would be the canonical stream. In my case would be individual community or individual streams. Shouldn't matter. And or proposed merge and splits at the definition level or at the concept level, which are distinct. And that would be kind of the neighborhood of the concept. And when you're asking about this concept, you're implicitly asking about the whole neighborhood, all the things that fit in that space. Unless you...
In my world, you don't really have proposed merges of claims.
Again, think concepts. And again,
well, a canonical claim is a concept, right? Yeah, so concepts in your definitions are a concept. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, that means that if there's a proposed merge of concepts, it entails proposed merge of claims that only differ on that concept.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So yeah, it happens.
No, I know it'll happen. I was just thinking that it wouldn't have to happen where somebody says, oh, these two claims are the same. It's more like, oh, these two definitions are the same, and oh, look, there's claims. But that requires that all canonical claims are fully specified in terms of their structure, right? Every definition and every
which in general they won't be because of progressive formalization. And I think very often what will happen is a first claim saying, hey, this underspecified claim corresponds to this more specified claim. Is that true? Is that equivalent? And second, if so, maybe also we want to merge it with this other more specific claim, which is a second layer of equivalence. But both are valid operations. And but the point is, what happens when it's disputed? And the idea is, if it's disputed, you'll want, like, if it's not disputed, okay, let's say the merge is accepted or the split is accepted. Well, if the split is accepted, you'll probably want to say, okay, I was using this ambiguous pre-split concept, and now I now know that there's this split, and the one I intend is actually this one and not that one, or maybe a synthesis over concept, which may or may not exist. I may have to create it if I really want it. But let's say, in most cases, it'll be, oh, I mean this one. And then I'll redo my query with this one, which is less ambiguous, no problem. And when I'm doing that, I'm explicitly saying, I'm not interested in the other side of the branch, right? Of the other side of the split. So that's cool. If it's a merge, it's more, well, anything that was said about any of the merged concepts would apply. So I would get all those claims about, like, I'm asking for all the claims about a concept that speak of a concept, or all the claims that support or refute or oppose a different claim. But it's the same idea, right? I'm looking for all claims related to this. Then I'll have to look at this or anything merged with this. Again, uncontested. Now, if it's contested, this is where it gets interesting. Of course, I can make a choice. I can say I agree or disagree with this claim. And in my space, this is what I'm using. Personal, or in my query, even not saying made a query local space, but make a query local request parameter where, hey, by the way, I'm considering this contested split or merge to be valid or invalid. And let's use that as the scope of the query. So I want all the things said about this concept or all the opposing claims as defined using these set of splits and merge being active among the contested ones, because that's my preference. And that would probably, I'd probably have my preferences. These are the splits and merge I agree with, and so apply those. Is that creating a bubble though? I don't know, but it would know, people would know that this is contested.
Yeah, what I'm thinking through is, there are a lot of use cases that you are implying here that don't match canonical debate. In terms of like, this is a concept I'm working with that I'm using, right? You're using for what? If you're using it to support other claims or whatever, that's a canonical debate function. But if you're using it for other things, you're kind of stepping outside of what I consider the scope.
No, okay, so the use case here is I have either a claim and I want to look at all the claims about like that oppose or support this claim, or all the claims that this claim supports or oppose. That's also interesting.
Right, you're navigating the argument map.
I'm navigating the argument map, and or I'm starting not with a claim, but with a concept, a definition, and I'm like a non-claim concept, an entity really. I'm starting with an entity, and what is said about that entity? What are the claims made about that entity?
Right, right.
I think those are two, and in a way they're not terribly different. I have an identifier for either a claim or an entity, but either way it's a concept. So I have an identifier for the concept and I want to know the neighborhood using some relation. Pretty obvious. Right. The problem is with a contested identity, it means normally including all claims about other concepts merged with that one, and or split from that one if I haven't specified where I stand on that split.
The question of the bubble or whatever is, when you're navigating that space, how fuzzy do you want to go in terms of that concept? Which means, do you want to know only claims that use exactly this concept, or do you want to also see ones that have slight deviations from that concept? How many deviations, which may be, how many definitional claims of deviation are you willing to accept from this
exactly
this concept, right? Yeah.
And what I'm saying when I speak of personal preference, personal settings, right? Let's not speak about personal space as I intend to do it in Federation. But let's just, I'm a canonical debate user. I'm logged in, so that means I have personal settings. And it would make sense to say, for me, this merge, like when, let me give my socialism example. I'm studying socialism and I want to use Marx's definition. I don't care about what Sanders or McConnell. I just want to use Marx's definition because I'm a scholar of the evolution of early socialism history. So on claims about early socialism history, that's my default scope for the concept socialism.
Right.
And vice, like here I'm kind of cheating because I'm saying let's use the word as an identifier and maybe we'll have more precise identifiers. But I'm saying it's the same thing. If it's a UUID or semantic, at some point it will get forked, split, merged, and what is the active neighborhood? And in some cases, I may want to say, and I may have even multiple contexts. I'm looking at the evolution, so I want to know about all the claims about socialism as it was defined in 19th, 20th, 21st century, and those are different scopes. Right?
So, yeah, I think like at least one approach to this is we talked about how definitions do range from ambiguous to more and more specific, right, or less ambiguous. And so even when you're talking about Marxist socialism, when it's as stark as different people and their opinion, that's pretty easy to see. But how many different varying definitions are there going to be of Marxist socialism, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets ugly, and so
that's why I'm taking that example.
So the question is, do you want, what you can do is navigate up to the most the widest umbrella definition for that. And then anything under there is acceptable as a claim for your search result, for example, or, you know.
And that's what I said. If there is, when I said if there's a common abstraction, if there isn't, maybe you can create one, because maybe there isn't. Maybe the common umbrella makes no sense. Like when we said the common umbrella of all definitions of Paris makes no sense. It's a useless concept. The common umbrella of all the Paris cities may have limited usage, but it's at least less completely crazy than all the definitions of Paris.
It'd be like Paris, the city, its name starts with a P. Then you don't have to know which.
And then the class is all cities whose names start with a P. And then how do you define city, and what population, and what population density, and because they're beginning to talk about that now. It's not just a population, it's within a certain perimeter, and blah, 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 blah. And even if we agree it's Paris, France, okay, Paris, France, intramuros, and region, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe I don't care. And there it makes sense to have a common abstraction. I may be saying about Paris that I don't care if it's.
I almost think, what's interesting is I think the concept there isn't a specific city. It is the class of cities is the concept. The class of cities named Paris, right? You're actually talking about all of them at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I said create a umbrella abstraction. It's a different object than. I think nobody expects the word Paris to designate the class of cities named Paris, which is a valid abstraction, but it's not what you mean when you say Paris, ever.
Paris. You would call it all cities named Paris is what would be the actual name of the concept, right?
Yeah. It's very unlikely, at least, or it would be extremely surprising usage for what it's worth. And this is where we get into fuzziness, but I'm trying to, let's forget the fuzziness. I've been reading some of the attempts to more statistical approaches to language still, so I'm not completely disconnected to what happens there. It's surprising what you can do with a corpus. Let's put it this way. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, it makes sense to have various scopes and to say, okay, in this search, I'm interested in this very narrow notion of this concept. And at this search, I'm looking at this broader abstraction, where we agree that all cities named Paris is not the kind of abstraction we mean here, but we may mean Paris, whether defined narrowly or broadly, which I think is a reasonable abstraction. Or rather, it's an abstraction that you could, if I say Paris without further ado, and it's clear I'm talking about Paris, France, I might mean the precise Paris intramuros, I might mean the greater Paris area, and I might mean either. It's not impossible for you to suppose that I don't care about which one it is, and that the word Paris may designate either concept indifferently to me. It's not a ridiculous scenario that I'm fuzzy on this when I'm saying it.
1 second.
Yep. My dog phone. Now the other case, well, I'll have to leave at the hour. So the other case, which is in a way more interesting, is if I'm looking at the history of the concept of socialism, which is again a valid scenario. Here I do mean everything that could be meant by the word socialism separately. I want all those concepts distinguished.
Some of this conversation is making it a little clearer for me too, the purpose of definitional claims. Just because, in the Paris example with the different versions of Paris, the city. In France, you're going to have, like, for example, does this street exist in your definition of Paris? Does this, and those are clear ones that don't take dispute. You have a version of Paris that includes that street and a version that doesn't.
Yeah.
But in this class of the history of socialism, well, that's interesting because, which definitions of socialism fit under the class of the history of socialism? That's I can have multiple histories of socialism.
Probably true. But let's assume a broad history that tries to include them all. Anything.
Well, anything that used the word socialism, maybe that's a programmatic version. But the concept that I'm thinking about right now, because what really makes me nervous about all of this is just the pulverization, the multiplication of numbers of definitions and therefore numbers of claims. And, when you have too much information, it's not useful anymore, right? And I think about it, maybe in terms of the way we do it naturally in language, which is you are presented and start with much more abstract versions of the definitions, and then you work into specifics on an as-needed basis, right?
Which is absolutely true. I mean, what we do is we use the abstraction, we attach the definition, the claims to the abstraction, and then we refine at need. I agree totally with that. And that's something.
And not only that, then we refine, but it's probably already been done for you because it's all crowdsourced and people spend their lives studying this kind of thing. And so as somebody new to the subject, we want to present the easier, more abstract version first, and then you start to go and dive in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the question is, given the crowdsourced people arguing about the definition, how to reconstitute this? Okay, this is the common abstraction that people agree on, as opposed to motivated abstraction, because those will also be there. And this is the distinction I want to be able to do in the system. And I have to leave now, leaving you with that question.
That is a good point. Yes, that is, I get the issue. That's a good point. Okay.
See ya.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
See ya.